Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to learn more about the legislative process. It's an important part of being a good advocate for public health. My name is Deborah Thompson. I've been a public health advocate for over 10 years. For nearly 8 of them, I served as the point of contact for legislators for the Iowa Department of Public Health. Now I own a consultant firm, and I'm a proud volunteer for the Iowa Public Health Association. I'm the consultant lead for the IPHA-sponsored Iowa Immunizes Coalition's Legislative Committee, and I also serve as the co-chair of the IPHA Advocacy Committee. I'm a public health enthusiast, and I want to share the knowledge I've gained about advocating for our profession in Iowa with whoever might find it helpful. I'll start by saying that I think we need to be honest with ourselves, public healthers. We need more allies in the Iowa legislature and the governor's office. These are Iowa's top leaders and decision makers. Their actions, or too often inaction, impacts how effective we can be in our local communities, how well we do our jobs, and the number of community members we can reach. And as a result, the health of Iowa residents is impacted. Ideally, these champions would support modernizing the public health system, assuring that there's capacity for us to properly execute our craft, and they would support and heighten our role in emergency situations like the pandemic. We also want them to understand and look for opportunities to increase health equity in our state and to learn more about how the policies they pass impact the social determinants of health that impact our quality of life and the length of it. Finally, these champions would represent diverse and balanced political leanings. If we truly want public health to break free of politics and be a nonpartisan issue, we've got to make friends with everybody. We know public health is for everyone, so let's talk to everyone about public health. Now, cultivating public health champions at the state level won't magically happen overnight. The IPHA membership comes from a diverse set of public health backgrounds, and for that reason, we come to the advocacy table knowing different things about advocacy. If we're going to ask elected leaders to become more familiar with what we do, we'll need to do the same for them. Let's work together to gain greater knowledge of the process and who's involved in it. Let's increase our advocacy knowledge and skill sets to become a little more savvy and influential. In this training, we'll start with some easy basics about Iowa's legislative process. Let's get started. Our training goal for today is to understand the Iowa state legislative process at a high level. We'll discuss who senators and representatives are and the political makeup for the Iowa House and Senate until the next election in 2022. We'll learn what the General Assembly is and then dive into the process for how a bill becomes a law. We'll watch an old classic and a video of a live debate, and finally, we'll discuss the role of advocates and lobbyists and the differences and similarities between them. Every 10 years, the Nonpartisan Legislative Services Agency draws 150 legislative districts across the state. The information used is based on the population of the state and where Iowans live. Every 2 years, when Iowans vote in the midterms or in the presidential elections, they'll also have the option to vote for state-level elected officials called state senators and state representatives. The Iowans who are elected to these positions will represent their constituents at the Iowa State House every year. Constituents are the voting members of a community, and the State House is in Des Moines. There are 100 Iowans elected every 2 years, and they're called representatives. They represent 100 of the legislative districts that the Legislative Services Agency creates. They serve shorter terms and have less people in their districts. There are 50 Iowans elected too, but they aren't all up for re-election every 2 years like representatives are. They serve 4-year terms, and so only half of them show up on the voting ballot every 2 years. So, for example, in 2020, only the senators in odd-numbered districts were up for re-election. The ones in even-numbered districts will be on the ballot in 2022. Senators have larger districts and with more people in them. 2022 is also when Iowans will vote for the person they want to see as governor of the state of Iowa. Right now, that's Kim Reynolds. So, as a resident of Iowa, you'll have one state-level representative and one state-level senator representing you in Des Moines every year. Now, if you're an organization like a local public health agency or a nonprofit that provides services to a county or multiple counties, then it's likely you'll have a few representatives and senators you may want to talk to or build relationships with. The most recent election occurred November 3rd of 2020. The results left the Republicans in charge of the House of Representatives. They now have 59 members. To pass a bill in the House, you have to have at least 51 votes. As the majority party, they'll have a nice margin to be able to pass the pieces of legislation they want, even if they don't get all 59 Republicans to vote for it. The election left the Democrats with 41 seats. They are the minority party and lost a few seats this election cycle. In the Senate, the November 2020 election left the Republicans in the majority as well. This means that the Republicans have a trifecta. They control the House, the Senate, and the governor's office. 6 Republicans are new faces. The question mark represents State Senate District 41. The current senator, Dr. Marionette Miller Meeks, has vacated her seat because she is the presumed winner of the 2nd congressional district race. A special election to fill her vacant seat has been set for January 26, 2021. This seat could be filled by either a Republican or a Democrat. The election left the Democrats with 18 seats in the 50-member Senate. They will have 1 new member joining their caucus. Every year, all of the representatives and senators travel to Des Moines from their home districts to convene at the beautiful Iowa State House. They spend months talking, discussing, debating, and compromising over public policy and budgetary matters that impact many or most Iowans. They hear information from experts from all over the state and then weigh that information against the values of their constituents back home. Then they make decisions on how to vote. In addition to information and values, they consider politics too. How will a vote impact their collective ability to win more seats or at least maintain the seats they have during the next election cycle? The new class of representatives and senators will begin their term on January 11th of 2021. They'll take an oath of office on that date, and the 89th General Assembly will begin. A General Assembly consists of 2 one-year sessions. The first session, 2021, will be 10 days longer than the next session in 2022. They can always end early or later than the 110 days allotted for the first session. That's 100 days for the second one. If they don't leave on time, though, they don't get paid for the extra days they have to be in Des Moines. This is a motivating factor to get their business done. They're also prohibited from accepting campaign donations during session. In an election year, this is an even greater motivator to leave on time or early. The General Assembly gets their business done through the legislative process. Let's begin this part of the training by revisiting an old friend. The classic Schoolhouse Rock video continues to be the best way to explain the legislative process. It's a 3-minute video that boils everything down very concisely. Iowa's legislative branch is set up a lot like the U.S. Congress in Washington, D.C. There are nuances, but at the 20,000-foot view, they're nearly identical. This video is a good starting point, so let's watch.
Woo, you sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee, but I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will, but today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." Then he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee, and I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be a law. I hope and pray that they will, but today I am still just a bill.
Listen to those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, through, but it looks like I'm going to live. Now I go to the House of Representatives and they vote on me.
If they vote yes, what happens?
Then I go to the Senate and the whole thing starts all over again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And if they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well, then I'm off to the White House where I'll wait in a line with a lot of other bills for the president to sign. And if he signs me, then I'll be a law. How I hope and pray that he will. But today I am still just a bill.
You mean even if the whole Congress says you should be a law, the president can still say no?
Yes, that's called a veto. If the president vetoes me, I have to go back to Congress and they vote on me again, and by that time you're so
By
old.
that time, it's very unlikely that you become a law. It's not easy to become a law, is it?
No, but how I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
He signed your bill. Now you're a law.
Oh, yes.
This is a flowchart that shows the process for how an idea becomes a law. It was created by the Iowa Legislative Services Agency. Remember, they're the ones that draw the legislative districts. In addition to that, and to the civics and educational items like this flowchart that they make, LSA conducts fiscal analysis of the state's budget. They provide IT and bill drafting services to the members of the legislature and the legislative staff, and they update and edit the Iowa code books. Finally, they're in charge of showing off Iowa's beautiful state house to the public, including school children, by providing tours. Let's take a closer look at the steps in this chart. As explained in the Schoolhouse Rock video, an idea is drafted into a formal piece of legislation called a bill. Legislators and the governor are the only people who can request bills to be drafted. The requester becomes the bill's primary sponsor, and a bill can have more than one co-sponsor. Before session, state departments and the executive branch do have a brief window of time to request bills as part of their legislative package, but there's a deadline, and after that, a department would need to find a bill sponsor to get the legislation drafted. The bill is then filed with either the House chamber, the Senate chamber, or both. It's assigned a file number and is sent to the majority leader in the Senate and/or the Speaker of the House. These are the top leaders in each chamber. Leadership decides whether or not to assign the bill to a committee. If it doesn't get assigned to a committee, the bill is dead. This doesn't happen very often. When assigned, the bill will be sent to a standing committee as explained in the fourth step. A standing committee works on policy. Appropriations committees work on the budget. The chair of the committee assigns the bill to a small group of committee members. This is called a subcommittee. Typically, the size of a subcommittee ranges from 3 to 5 members. Most of the members will be affiliated with the majority party. The committee's ranking member will assign minority committee members. Right now, for the 2021 session, Republicans will have more members on the committees and subcommittees compared to Democrats. They are the majority party for both the House and Senate chambers. The ranking member of a committee has the most authority for the minority party. The committee chair has the most authority of all the members of the committee. So let's say that the chair of Human Resources creates a subcommittee of Representatives Bob, Sally, and George. Representatives Bob, Sally, and George are now responsible for studying the bill more in depth and working with the lobby on possible improvements to it. The chair of a committee also has the power to kill a bill by not assigning it to a subcommittee at all. The chair of the subcommittee, maybe that's Representative Sally, schedules public meetings called subcommittee meetings that are the first opportunity for public comment. They're mostly attended by the lobby, by the person or people who had the idea, that might be a constituent or an advocacy group, and then legislative staff. The chair of the subcommittee may also choose not to study the bill more in depth, and so the bill would die at the subcommittee level if public meetings weren't held. At this step, subcommittee chairs have quite a bit of influence on the bill's fate. For legislators, the purpose of the subcommittee meetings are to ask questions about the background of the bill and its purpose, and for the lobby to publicly voice concerns or support for it. They also express concerns or support in private meetings with legislators too. There's no limit on the number of subcommittees that can be held on a piece of legislation, and depending on the complexity of the bill, a subcommittee may meet several times. They just need to be aware of the deadlines that can make a bill ineligible for further consideration. We'll cover those in a couple of slides. Public and private conversations and meetings typically result in changes to the bill in order to continue to gain the buy-in and support that it needs to pass. It's rare that no one wants to tweak a bill. Legislators will make as many changes as they need at each step in the process. These are called amendments. The subcommittee will make recommendations to the full standing committee on whether or not the bill should be voted out of the committee. If the subcommittee recommends passage, the full committee will vote on the bill. If the majority of the members of the committee vote in favor of it, the bill passes out and then goes to the full chamber for debate on the floor. Here's the same information that I just explained. You have the chair of the committee who appoints the majority members. In our example, that was Representative Sally as the subcommittee chair, and then maybe Bob as the other Republican. The ranking member of the full committee, right now that's a Democrat, appointed a fellow Democrat for the subcommittee. We'll say that's George. This subcommittee of 3 will hold public meetings and provide recommended actions on the bill to the full committee. The number of total committee members will differ from one committee to the next. Did you know that an average of 2,000 bills are introduced each year in the legislature? It's an impossible task to consider each one, and so the legislature has a prioritization system built into its process. They're called funnel deadlines. Funnel deadlines are used to narrow the focus of the legislature's work so that they can get to an ending point in April, May, or sometimes June if they get stuck in negotiations. Simply put, a bill needs to have advanced to certain places in the process. If not, they're dead in their current form. There are exceptions to the funnel deadlines. They're highlighted on the last part of the session timeline. The session timeline explains the requirements for a bill to pass through funnels and lists the exemptions as well. It can be found on the home page of the General Assembly's website under the list of popular publications. To pass the first funnel, the bill has to come out of a committee in the same chamber it was introduced in. So a House file has to be passed out of a House committee. To pass the second funnel, the bill has to pass the full chamber it was introduced in and a committee in the second chamber. So, using our example from earlier, the bill that's now out of the House committee has to pass the full House chamber, travel over to the Senate, and then pass out of a Senate committee. So the committees can't dilly-dally in studying and passing these bills. They've got to meet deadlines so that the bills they're working on don't die. Now, I'm going to let you in on a terribly kept secret. There's really no such thing as a dead bill. There are enough rules, exceptions, and procedures that can keep a bill alive or resurrect it later in the process if it did die in its original form. This is frustrating when it works against you, and a celebration when it works in your favor. It's all a part of the negotiating, wheeling and dealing, and flexibility of the process. In sum, what funnel deadlines really do is tell you where your issue lies on the list of priorities for the legislature. It tells you how much harder you're going to have to work to achieve your goals. These are valuable advocacy lessons that will help inform your strategies moving forward. Both the House and the Senate have several standing committees that work on policy bills. The Ways and Means committees work on issues involving taxes, fees, and fines. There are also standing appropriations committees in each chamber. They work on bills that involve spending or investing state money, like general funds, for example. These are also the committees that the state budget bills go through, too. The committees focus on specific areas of policy like agriculture or education. Human Resources is a popular committee for each chamber's work on public health issues. The budget committees are a little different than the policy committees in a couple of ways. They are the pieces of the pie that make up the total budget to be appropriated for the executive branch to do its work. This is all part of the system of checks and balances the founders placed into the 3 branches of government. Remember from high school civics that the legislative branch represents the state's citizens, and they provide the guidance for the executive branch and the agencies in the executive branch to implement the will of the people. And then, of course, the judicial branch plays the referee if either of the other branches goes too far. The budget committees are also different because they consist of both representatives and senators. They are joint committees. Technically, they're called joint subcommittees because their work goes to the full appropriations committees in each chamber for approval before floor debate. The chairs of these joint budget subcommittees are given budget targets in March. This tells them how much money they have to spend on the various programs and departments under their purview. Like the policy committees, they focus on specific areas too, like natural resources, economic development, and health and human services. The Health and Human Services budget is where the departments of Public Health, Aging, Human Services, and Veterans Affairs receive their funding. The committee members create a budget bill that provides authorization language for the executive branch to spend the money appropriated in it, and it should come as no surprise that a lot of negotiation takes place. This happens between the chambers and involves the governor's office too. And the governor can veto parts of an appropriations bill, so it's wise to get her approval on many things. So far in this training, we've learned about the current political makeup of the Iowa House and Senate, what a General Assembly is, what subcommittees, committees, and joint budget committees are and what they do, and we've discussed funnel deadlines. Let's continue with our LSA process flowchart and dig into amendments and floor debates. We discussed Step 5, called Committee Action. Recall that the subcommittee reports to the full committee on its findings. It may suggest changes to the bill called amendments. Think of amendments as edits to the bill. These are changes that are negotiated to improve the bill's chance of passage. Now, I didn't say that every amendment improves the policy goals of the bill, but compromise is often necessary to gain the buy-in and support needed to pass a bill through two chambers and to get the governor's signature on it too. What you and I think is the best policy idea may not be what others think is best. Somewhere in between, a compromise can move us all forward and in a way that the majority of Iowans will find acceptable. So a committee may decide to amend the bill before it votes it out in order to make it eligible for floor debate. That means that the full House chamber of 100 representatives or the full Senate chamber of 50 senators will now get to consider the bill. Once it's on the floor, any member of the chamber can file amendments. It gets a little tricky because it's out of your hands at this point if you've been working on the bill as an advocate or lobbyist. You have to monitor the amendments as they're filed and try your best to get in front of them if you don't like them. This typically involves getting information quickly to the representative or senator who's in charge of running the bill when it gets to the floor. This way, they can try to talk to whoever's sponsoring the amendment and ask them to either compromise or withdraw the amendment completely. On this slide is a screenshot of the language in the beginning part of a bill called House File 2589. Next to it is an amendment offered by Representative John Forbes. This is Amendment H-8130, and if passed, it will amend House File 2589 in 7 areas. That's the blue numbering on the side. A cool feature here is that when you click on the numbers, they're hyperlinked and they'll take you directly to where the changes would be made in the bill. That's super helpful on a lengthy bill. Some of these can be as long as 100 pages or more. Let's watch a video of the floor debate on House File 2492 to see all of this in action. The short title of the bill is Iowa Health and Wellness Plan Re-enrollment. The Iowa Health and Wellness Plan is part of the Iowa Medicaid program. This is the public health insurance program for Iowans who don't earn enough income to afford private health insurance and their employer doesn't provide it as a benefit. There's a lot to unpack in this bill, but let's start with the intent and the players. The bill requires that the Department of Human Services, this is the executive branch agency that runs the program, seek federal approval to make a change in the plan. The Iowa Medicaid program is a state and federal partnership, and the state must ask to make changes before it can implement new ideas. Currently, when a person enrolls in this public health insurance program, they're given an option. They can do an annual wellness assessment to avoid paying monthly premiums. But if they don't do the wellness assessment, then they're required to pay a monthly premium. If they don't pay the premiums, then they're disenrolled from the program. It's common that eventually they'll seek to re-enroll in the program. The change that the bill would make is to require that once they seek re-enrollment in the Iowa Health and Wellness Plan a second time for not paying their monthly contributions, they must be required to pay back the premiums they did not previously pay and that led to their disenrollment. This must be done before they can re-enroll for the second time. So the bill allows this to happen one time, that is, failing to pay monthly premiums that are charged after not doing a health assessment. But after the second time of being disenrolled for not paying, you have to pay your bills, so to speak, before you can be re-enrolled again. Representative Osmundson is the bill's floor manager. She didn't sponsor the bill, the chair of the Human Resources Committee, Shannon Lundgren, did, but it's common for someone other than the bill's sponsor to run the bill on the floor. Representative Osmundson was the chair of the subcommittee when the bill was in committee. Representative Wilburn will offer an amendment to the bill on the floor. He was the Democrat, the minority party member that was appointed by the ranking Democrat of the Human Resources Committee on the subcommittee. Now, spoiler alert, this bill didn't become law, but it did make it over to the Senate before it died. Let's watch the video
House
now.
File 2492.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill requires the Department of Human Services to seek federal approval to require Iowa Healthy and Wellness Plan members who've been re-enrolled after failing to pay their monthly contributions or complete their healthy behaviors requirement to pay the state those funds before being re-enrolled after their second termination. Everyone forgets now and then, so this gives them one free pass. This will incentivize members to complete their preventative health care screenings. Iowa Code 249 states that the purpose of the Iowa Health and Wellness Plan is to provide incentives to encourage personal responsibility, cost-conscious utilization of health care, and adoption of preventative practices and healthy behaviors. Mr. Speaker, there is an amendment.
There are amendments. The clerk will call up an amendment.
H8043 by Wilburn of Story.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Story, Representative Wilburn, for opening comments on H8043.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. As you consider the main bill, which I want to remind folks that these are Iowans who are making up to below 133% of the poverty level, so hardworking Iowans. I want to thank Representative Osmundson for her work with me on this bill. What this amendment will do is it provides an exemption for members who can show proof that they have scheduled their doctor's appointment even up till after the due date so that they are not dropped. It acknowledges that it can be challenging sometimes to actually get your appointment, and there's kind of a couple levels I'd ask you to consider this on. One, on a surface level, think about the flexible spending accounts that many of us have, and the rush to the end of the year to try and get something spent or try and get an appointment. And so I want to thank Representative Osmundson for considering some of the logistical challenges with that. I think on a deeper level or a secondary level, it acknowledges some concerns that were raised by the National Alliance on Mental Illness, folks, some of whom also have brain injury, and the challenge of those, especially who do not have a case manager working with them on making sure that things are organized, and only have a family member who it can be challenging to navigate some of the challenges associated with this. So I think this is a request for a reasonable exemption and understanding that sometimes it just takes a little while to get a doctor's appointment, especially if you live in rural Iowa. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
There is an amendment to the amendment. The clerk will call up the amendment.
H8080 by Osmundson of Clayton.
The chair recognizes the lady from Clayton, Representative Osmundson, for the opening comments for H080.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do appreciate Representative Wilburn's work on this bill and bringing forth an amendment to make it even better. It is a good amendment, but I felt it needed to add a time limitation. So in talking with Representative Wilburn, we agreed that 90 days should be an adequate length of time to complete a scheduled appointment. These are my opening comments.
Is there discussion? Seeing no discussion, the chair recognizes the lady from Clayton for closing remarks on H8080. The lady from Clayton moves H8080. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The amendment has passed. Back to Amendment 8043 as amended. Is there discussion? Seeing no further discussion, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Story for closing comments on H8043.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I want to acknowledge Representative Osmundson for working with me on some logistical challenges in acknowledgement that sometimes there are unintended consequences that may happen because of a bill that might come forward. Other than that, I just, again, want to point back to these are Iowans who, many of whom are working, and this, I agree, is a reasonable accommodation, and Mr. Speaker, I ask for division of the record.
The gentleman from Story has asked for a division of record on Amendment H8043. The clerk will, seconded by Confirst, the clerk will open the machine, record your vote. If you'll vote aye for yes and no for no. Hagenow, aye. Klein, aye. Jones, aye. Best, aye. Ellert, aye. Running Marquardt, aye. Winkler, aye. Hull, aye. Bacon, aye. Have you all now voted? The clerk will close your machine and record your vote. With aye 95, nay 0, and now not voting or absent 5, the amendment has passed. We're now back on House File 2492 as amended. Is there discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Wilburn from Story.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. I appreciate the vote on this and trying to understand some of the logistical challenges that can happen. Reasonable people can disagree. However, I want to point out that the overall goal of this is to make sure that people are getting their wellness checks and to promote health and wellness. Several concerns came up during the subcommittee meeting about how logistically this was being implemented by Department of Human Services. In fact, it came after just our banter and discussion dialogue about this, it came to my attention towards the end of last week that there were mistakes made on the Department of Human Services website about information on this particular bill. And just to point out that mistakes can be made even on the state government's part. A second thing that I'd like to point out is that in the area of potential mistakes and or trying to get clarity on what exactly is happening, in order to give a heads up, it's good that the MCOs are supposed to give a notice to individuals who are about to lose their coverage because of not paying for their monthly fee for this. So again, they are paying for this, but they will be dropped. I checked the DHS webpage to see examples of the letter that individuals who are going to be dropped from this, and one of the, first of all, it was a little challenging to find. Many people, but not all, have access to a laptop computer. It took me just a few minutes to find it, but not everybody will have those. Many people will have a cell phone. And I'd like to think I'm somewhat intelligent, but you know that on a cell phone, it can look a little different than it does on your laptop. And it took me 20 minutes to find the example of the letters that participants are supposed to receive before they get dropped. And as of about 1 hour ago, Iowa Total Care still did not have an example of the letter. It said that it is pending. I don't know if that means they haven't given DHS the letter. I don't know if that means they haven't created a letter and that they are not notifying people who are about to be dropped and lose their health care and be part of the uninsured, which is one of those unintended consequences that I spoke of. Finally, I will close with items from the fiscal note, which became available a little bit later, too, after the subcommittee meeting, of their findings. One, it says significant system work would be necessary to put this in place. Part of it is federal, 88.3% of it is federal dollars, so not all of this is federal dollars that being recouped. A second part is that they point out that not all individuals will choose to re-enroll after they get dropped. So again, as it is now, there are people who are becoming uninsured. If you are looking at the fiscal impact, it points out that requiring repayment of the monthly contributions to regain eligibility would likely result in fewer members enrolled in the health and wellness plan. So again, we've not accomplished the goal of making sure that we don't have uninsured Iowans. It also says, if you're looking at this fiscally, the savings is not expected to be significant because it is assumed that members needing coverage are likely to reapply or go to a hospital for care, and the hospital will assist them in re-enrolling. So again, if they get dropped, perhaps they may not go until they need to go to the hospital, but then again at that point, they don't get the coverage until they start paying again. So I'll point back to that there's no significant anticipated revenue or payment coming back. And finally, it's estimated that in order to put this in place, that it would be a one-time cost to DHS of $216,000, and that the impact for repayment of monthly contributions it can't be determined, but it's likely to be minimal due to the state match. Again, any money coming back, roughly 88% will be going back to the federal government. And so we're talking about 749 individuals per month. At best, if people are continuing to be repeat offenders, we are spending a little bit more, a significant amount more than it is to get this set up. And because of the federal match, it would take approximately 7 or 8 years to recoup the initial investment of $216,000. With that, again, I want to thank Representative Osmundson and ask you to consider the choice whether you think that you're a rules person, but think of the overall goal as we want to have Iowans and working Iowans, all Iowans, but in this case it's related to working Iowans, just not making enough money, that they are part of the insured. And with that, I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the lady from Clinton, Representative Wolf.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good evening, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, people who lose their insurance coverage for whatever reason still get sick, they still get into accidents, they still need medical care, and if they don't have insurance coverage, they're often going to get that medical care, even non-emergent medical care, at our local emergency rooms. And at that point, I can tell you who is paying for their medical treatment. It's us, it's the taxpayers of Iowa, it's the people who live in those communities. So it's nice to think that this is going to have some kind of affirmative impact on people taking care of business and getting their checkups, but a lot of people who have this kind of insurance might not have the wherewithal to do that. I think that's one of the reasons why the National Alliance for Mental Health is registered in opposition to this bill. So, because anything that's going to result in fewer people covered by insurance, in my opinion, is going to result in more costs being passed on to Iowa citizens and Iowa taxpayers. I'll be a no on this bill. Thank you.
The chair recognizes the lady from Black Hawk, Representative Brown Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just stand to confirm what Representative Wilburn told us. As I work with those patients on a daily basis, a lot of those folks do have some cognitive or mental complications. And so they don't have computers, many of them. A lot of my patients still have flip phones, so they don't have the computer phones like we have, so they're not able to follow up and get that paperwork. The other thing with some of these folks is if they can't find it instantly, they're going to give up. They don't have the means to continue to find that. They may not have the transportation to get to a place where they can use computer access. So those are the kinds of things that I think we need to think about. They also are going to be asked to do the back pay, and they are already living on less than 133% of poverty. So those folks don't have the means to do that. So I just think we need to think long and hard on that. I don't know that we want people to drop off unintentionally. We, of course, as in the medical field, I would love for them to get their well checks all the time, but also with the provider shortage in Waterloo and across Iowa, some of those folks aren't getting the care from their providers and those nice reminders, and then they don't have access. So unfortunately, I don't think this is a well thought out bill, and almost comes off a little bit mean towards some of the folks that are less privileged.
Seeing no further discussion, the chair recognizes the lady from Clayton for closing remarks on House File 2492.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A couple things I'd like to clarify. That these members do receive an invoice each month that shows what is due. So they have invoices for 2 to 3 months, for 3 months before they would be taken off the plan. The other thing is if they've completed their healthy behaviors, they aren't even paying a premium to begin with. So I would like to thank my subcommittee, Representative Tom Moore and Russ Wilburn, for all your help. And I would hope that we could all support this bill because it's ultimately about helping people to live a healthy lifestyle. Mr. Speaker, I move House File 2492 as amended.
The lady from Clayton moves the bill be read for the last time and placed on its passage. Are there objections? Seeing none, the clerk will read.
House File 4292, a bill for an act relating to the re-enrollment following a member's termination of the Iowa Health and Wellness Plan being enacted by a General Assembly of the State of Iowa.
The question now is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor of its passage shall vote aye. Those opposed shall vote no. The clerk will receive your vote. Klein, aye. Have you all now voted? The clerk will close the machine and record your vote. The House will pay attention to the results of the vote. Those voting aye, 56. Those voting no, 39. Absent or not voting, 5. The bill, having received a constitutional majority, is declared to have passed the House. Are there objections to the title? The chair hears none. The title is agreed to.
Representative Wilburn referenced a document called the fiscal note. Fiscal notes are required by law when a bill is estimated to impact the state budget by at least $100,000 in 1 year or $500,000 over 5 years. Impact includes generating revenue or increasing state expenditures. For House File 2492, the estimated impact is a cost of $216,000. Fiscal notes are published by the nonpartisan LSA's Fiscal Division. They request fiscal impact information from the executive branch departments to start their analysis, but they don't automatically come to the same conclusion as the departments. Fiscal notes do not look at the economic costs or job impacts of a proposed piece of legislation, only what it will do to the state budget. Okay. You've made it through the subcommittee, committee, and the floor debate process in the Chamber of Origin. Way to go. An easy way to remember all of this is to think of Russian nesting dolls. They start small and then get bigger and bigger, right? But recall from the Schoolhouse Rock video that now we have to do it all over again. The bill goes to leadership in the next chamber, gets assigned to a committee, a subcommittee is assigned, the bill is voted out of the full committee, and then the full chamber votes on it. After it passes both chambers, it then goes to the governor where she can exercise several options that may also impact the bill's fate. Governor Kim Reynolds can either sign a bill, veto a bill, or take no action on a bill. If she signs it, then it becomes law either on July 1 of the year, or if an enactment date is specified in the bill, Then it goes into effect at that time. If she vetoes the bill, then the legislature can override it with enough votes or take it up again next session. If she takes no action on the bill, after 30 days the bill will be considered vetoed. For appropriations bills only, she has the option to veto specific parts called line items. For example, if the legislature had appropriated the $216,000 for DHS to implement House File 2492, she could veto that appropriation. She can choose to sign a bill with a ceremonial signing, which gives a bill's supporters a chance to celebrate their victory. It's a nice photo op, and you can get a commemorative pin she may have used to sign the bill. They're really nice mementos. Once the governor signs the bill into law, the code editors at the LSA will incorporate the changes made by the bill into the Code of Iowa. The code is where all of Iowa's laws are kept. It takes careful eyes and attention to detail to ensure that the changes are correct. For now, that ends the Legislative Process 101 part of this training, but truly, the process never ends. After the law is passed by the legislative branch and signed by the governor, who leads the executive branch, the agencies in the executive branch, like the Iowa Department of Public Health or the Iowa Department of Human Services, must implement the new laws. The advocates and lobbyists who work to get the legislation passed can celebrate their victory for now, though. Now, this training is focused on the role of elected representatives and senators, but let's take a look at the role of the advocates and the lobby in the legislative process. Throughout the entire process, advocates and lobbyists work to foster a bill through. If it gets hung up at certain points, they're crucial to keeping the bill going. They may work out the negotiations, provide answers to questions, and sometimes they can even act as cheerleaders to give the elected official the confidence they need to debate the bill publicly. It's not easy arguing something as a layman, and that's really what legislators are, regular folk like you and I. Remember, I said that 2,000 bills get introduced annually, and do you recall the couple dozens of committees they have just to study most of these bills? How in the world can a citizen who gets elected be expected to become a subject matter expert in all of the issues that impact the lives of Iowans? Well, quite frankly, they can't. That's why advocates and lobbyists serve as the subject matter experts for these issues. They're usually people who serve in these roles for many, many years, and so they have a tremendous amount of historical knowledge about politics and policy as well. Not all of them are good people, but most of them, in Iowa anyway, are. Their reputation is their livelihood, and if they become known for trickery or dishonesty, then they won't get their goals accomplished and their market value will plummet. This is Senator Amanda Reagan. She served the citizens in the counties of Cerro Gordo, Franklin, and Butler for nearly 20 years. She was interviewed for one of the advocacy episodes in the Midwestern Public Health Training Center's Share Public Health podcasts. You can check these out anywhere you find your podcast. Just search for Share Public Health. Here's a clip of her talking about the importance of subject matter experts in public health.
I think it goes back to talking about getting the facts. You know, you can get it off the internet, or you can get it off of some crazy other thing or whatever, or you can go to somebody that has basic understanding and knowledge of the subjects that they're talking about. And so for me, it's important when people in healthcare come and talk to me about whatever the issue is, because I think they come to me with, knowledge of understanding and educated about the issue. We've had issues, and I think you've been at some of those, and emotion comes before the education. And I understand how that happens. Your personal life is going to have a huge impact on why you come to understand about issues as well. But that sometimes doesn't hold as much weight as, having the scientific background on certain things. We're all just laymen coming to the legislature. It is so important to have people that have had the experiences, or people that have had the understanding and interaction with people that know how to deal with issues.
Lobbyists and advocates are not very different from each other. Both publicly support a cause or a policy change. They both provide education on issues. They organize, lead, and participate in efforts to pass laws, ordinances, or to make other changes, and they may provide public testimony at public hearings. Both work to build relationships with policymakers and other influencers too. Lobbying is just a more specific form of advocacy. Advocacy is intended to influence behaviors. In public health, we're all advocates because we provide education that we hope will lead Iowans to make the healthy choice. We create messaging to provide helpful information in the hopes that they avoid or quit smoking, for example. During the COVID pandemic, we asked Iowans to wear a mask, and every year we educate and ask that they get their flu shots too. To advocate on behalf of these healthy choices, we push out messages by way of press releases, social media posts, we host webinars, and we put up billboards. When the healthy choice is not the easiest choice, then we advocate and sometimes lobby to remove the barriers to being healthy. So again, lobbying is a form of advocacy. It's a strategic but less formal way of influencing decision makers. It involves open two-way dialogue, finding common ground with different stakeholders, creating win-win situations, and investing in long-term relationships with decision makers. So, methods of lobbying may include writing personal letters or emails, having face-to-face meetings or phone calls, and having informal contacts around town or at events. It's a common misconception that these are not allowable activities under federal and state grant guidelines or even state laws. Before making this blanket assumption, I would encourage you to actually ask program managers to define what exact activities are not allowable. It's been my experience that there's not any one definition and opinions change from one grant manager to the next. There are some Iowa laws that you do have to be aware of. If you plan to use a lobbying strategy to influence decision makers to pass a bill, then you're required to register as a lobbyist. Registering gives you access to an online system that allows you to register for or against bills. If you are an employee of a government agency, then you will have maybe one or two registered lobbyists. That's the legislative liaison and perhaps the director of the department. If you work for a state agency and you'd like to lobby on a bill, you can, but the ethics laws state that you can't lobby for a direct benefit to your program area. So, for example, if you work in the tobacco division of the state health department, you may educate on tobacco use in Iowa, but you can't be a registered lobbyist for a specific campaign to increase tobacco cessation programming, for example. This is considered a conflict of interest. However, if you'd like to join an effort to help the substance abuse prevention program, that's permissible. Be leery, though, of your agency's policies. They may require that you take vacation to do this. I stress, though, that it is legal and you did not give up your rights as a citizen to engage in the process just because you work for government. If you work for a nonprofit, then you have to adhere to IRS rules governing 501c3s or 501c4s, etc. Lobbyists are required to report the money they make lobbying the government. That's another requirement, and they have to adhere to ethics laws like avoiding conflicts of interest if they have multiple clients. In sum, you should register as a lobbyist if you're asking for funding or law changes and talking with more than your own representatives or senators. You should register if you've been hired by an organization to represent their interests at the Iowa State House, too. This is often part of a nonprofit's executive director duties. For example, Lena Tucker Reinders is the registered lobbyist for the Iowa Public Health Association. Finally, just ask for clarification. It hurts the profession of public health to not have enough people who are willing to seek clarification on what advocacy and lobbying activities they can legally do. We just make assumptions that the dreaded L or A word is somehow dangerous and we treat without trying. This is in no way helpful to meeting our mission to promote, improve, and to protect the health of Iowans. That's it. You made it through. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn more about the Iowa State legislative process. Knowledge is power, and this knowledge will make you a more powerful and influential advocate or lobbyist on behalf of the public health profession. Thank you, too, for your service to the health of your communities, your state, and your nation. For more information, check out the Iowa Public Health Association.